The voicemail came in at 6:47 p.m., just as I was about to shut down my laptop and call it a day. I'd spent most of the afternoon finalizing quarterly reports, and my brain was already half checked out fantasizing about leftovers and a cold beer. I wouldn't have even looked at my phone if it hadn't buzzed twice. First a missed call, then a voicemail. Dad. We weren't what you'd call a tight-knit family, but we had our rhythm. Birthdays, tax season, and the occasional Sunday dinner where the silence was louder than any conversation. So seeing his name on my screen was unusual. I figured it was about the family reunion scheduled for next weekend, a thinly veiled excuse to get everyone together under one roof and pretend the last 2 years hadn't been a train wreck. I tapped play as I slipped my laptop into its case. David, don't bother coming to the reunion. We're cutting ties. That was it. 7 words cleanly delivered. No hesitation, no emotion, just final. I froze halfway through zipping the bag, played it again. We're cutting ties. I stood in my office, the soft glow of the desk lamp painting shadows against the far wall. I waited for the confusion to hit or the sting or maybe a flood of anger, but none of that came. Instead, there was just stillness, like the air had been sucked out of the room and replaced with static. He sounded like he was canceling a dentist appointment, not disowning his son. I stared at the phone thumb hovering over the screen. A dozen sarcastic replies swirled in my head. Happy holidays to you too, or glad I didn't book a flight. But none of it felt right. I didn't want a back and forth. I didn't want to fight. So I typed a single word, understood. And then I did something I should have done months ago. I pulled out the business loan ledger from the bottom drawer of my desk. My name sat there right next to my father's and mother's, all 3 in black ink, a neat little row of signatures tying us to the same weighty obligation. The family business, the bakery they built, the brand I'd helped modernize, expand, and keep afloat when supply chains went to hell and online orders exploded. I stared at my name for a long time. Then slowly I drew a bold black line right through it. I wasn't angry. I was free. I called my attorney that night, walked her through what had happened, and asked her to begin the paperwork to formally remove me from the company's financial obligations. She asked if I was sure. I said, I'm tired of being the only one held responsible. By morning, I had canceled my reunion flight, sent a professional email to my parents confirming the separation, and deleted the group chat titled Reunion 24 Family Only. Seemed appropriate. For the next 36 hours, I heard nothing. Silence at first felt like victory. Then the storm hit. Missed calls 78 from my mother alone. Voicemails, emails, frantic texts from Dad's accountant. One message read, David, please call us. We need to talk now. Another one. You can't just pull out. The loan is due next month. This affects all of us. But I stayed silent, because for the first time I wasn't reacting, I was choosing, and they had no idea what that meant. By the 3rd day, the silence broke, not with an apology or even an explanation, but with a group email from my mother titled Urgent Family Meeting via Zoom Mandatory. Mandatory. That word sat like a splinter in my brain. I almost deleted the email without opening it, but curiosity or maybe that old sense of obligation got the better of me. Inside was a short message. Please be online tomorrow at 6 p.m. sharp. This is important for all of us. Mom. All of us. Funny considering Dad made it clear I was no longer part of the U.S. I logged in the next evening more out of courtesy to my mother than any desire to engage. The screen filled with familiar faces, Emily always early, Uncle Greg who hadn't said a word to me in months, and my parents sitting side by side like they hadn't just tried to cut me out of my own life. David, Mom started, her voice shaky. Thank you for joining. Dad didn't look at me. I nodded stiffly. Let's get to it. She glanced at him. He cleared his throat like he was preparing for a boardroom pitch, not a conversation with his son. There's been misunderstanding, he said. You overreacted. The voicemail wasn't meant to be permanent. I leaned forward. You told me not to come to the reunion, that we were cutting ties. Which part was I supposed to misunderstand? Emily chimed in, trying to soften the blow. Maybe it came out wrong, David. You know how he is when he's angry. No, I said, my voice calm but sharp. I don't know how he is anymore. Because the man I knew wouldn't try to dissolve a business behind my back. My father's jaw tensed. We were restructuring. You were hiding funds in a separate account. That's not restructuring. That's theft. The screen went quiet. For a few seconds, all I heard was the low hum of my apartment's air conditioning and the distant honk of a car outside. Finally, my mom said, we needed that money for the warehouse expansion. You weren't responding. What choice did we have? I laughed, short and humorless. You had every choice. You just didn't think I'd find out. You thought I'd stay silent like I always have. I saw Emily wince at that. Because she knew it was true. For years, I'd swallowed things. The family jokes about how I was the too serious one. The dismissals when I pushed for online sales. The time Dad made me rewrite a 30-page logistics plan and then presented it to investors as his own. All of it. Now I was tired of being reasonable. You said we're done, I continued. So I'm done too. I've removed myself from the business. You'll receive a formal statement through my lawyer by Friday. Dad's face flushed. You're making a mistake, David. This business is your legacy. I shook my head. It was. Now it's just a liability. The call ended with Mom pleading Emily quietly crying and Dad muttering something about betrayal. I sat at my desk long after the Zoom window disappeared, staring at the reflection of my face in the dark screen. My hands trembled not from regret but from the weight of finally choosing myself. This wasn't just about money. It was about respect. And for once I wasn't going to wait for them to hand it to me. It was a Thursday afternoon when everything snapped. I was at my desk reviewing quarterly sales from one of the subsidiaries I managed independently when an email notification slid across my screen. Subject line: notice of business reallocation approval complete. My stomach knotted. It was from the family accountant Martin. I hadn't spoken to him since I pulled my name from the main family loan. I clicked the attachment. Inside was a signed authorization showing that $280,000, part of the business credit line that I had helped secure through my contacts, had just been reallocated to a new entity, Hollow Birch Imports LLC. I'd never heard of it. I dug deeper. The signatures were their dad's and Emily's. At first I thought it had to be a mistake. Maybe it was forged. Maybe someone hacked into the system. But when I called Martin, his voice cracked the moment he answered. I told your father not to rope Emily into this, he muttered. She said she thought you agreed. What the hell is Hollow Birch? It's your dad's new import company. He said it was part of a pivot strategy, that you were stepping away and he was reallocating assets to protect the family. I closed my laptop. Hard. He wasn't just cutting me out anymore, he was rebuilding on top of what I'd built and using Emily to do it. The sister who had cried and begged for peace was now part of a backdoor deal to siphon off funding I was still legally tied to. And I hadn't signed a damn thing. I called Emily. She picked up fast. Hey, don't hey me, I snapped. You signed off on reallocating business funds into something I've never heard of. Do you know what you just did? Her voice faltered. I thought Dad said you agreed. You believed him? I was yelling now, pacing across my apartment. After everything, you thought I just changed my mind and said sure, take nearly $1,000, and invested in some shadow LLC I wasn't even told about. I was trying to help. He said the business was sinking. I stopped pacing. So you tried to save him with my money. Silence. Emily, I said quietly. Do you have any idea what this means? If the bank finds out that money moved without unanimous approval, we could all be held liable. Me most of all. I didn't, he said. Her voice cracked. I didn't think you'd do anything drastic. You know what I said? You were right, until today. That night I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling thinking about the years I'd worked to make that business stable. The late nights, the strategy meetings, the times I covered payroll when Dad said, just wait until next month. The hours I defended him to vendors and clients when checks bounced or shipments were delayed because he was restructuring. He wasn't restructuring, he was looting. And now Emily, the one person I thought had my back, had handed him the keys to the vault. By 8 a.m. I had a plan. I drove straight to my lawyer's office. I slid the printed documentation across the table: emails, account transfers, LLC paperwork, and Emily's signature. I want to file an emergency injunction, I said. Freeze the accounts. All of them. She raised an eyebrow. You sure about this? I've never been more sure. Within 24 hours, the court issued a temporary freeze order halting all financial activity connected to the business. Hollow Birch, the new LLC, was suspended pending an investigation. That evening, my phone rang. My father. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again. Emily. This time I answered. David, she said, her voice trembling. Dad's freaking out. The accounts are frozen. Martin called. He said there's going to be an audit. Yes, I said, because that's what happens when people forge signatures and steal money. I didn't mean to hurt you. You didn't mean to, I said slowly. But you did. And now we all have to live with it. I could hear her crying softly on the other end. I almost softened. Almost. But I couldn't forget how quickly she had signed the papers. How easily she was swayed. Emily, I said I love you. But from now on, I'm treating this like a business problem. And that means no more hand-holding. No more giving people the benefit of the doubt. She said something, I don't remember what. I just remember hanging up. I leaned back in my chair, the city lights flickering outside my window. For the first time in my life, I felt no guilt, no shame, no fear, just clarity. They made their moves in the dark. I brought it into the light. And now I was going to burn the whole rotten foundation to the ground before it could take me with it. 3 days after I froze the accounts, my father showed up at my apartment uninvited. He didn't knock. He pounded. I opened the door slowly, already bracing myself. He pushed in without waiting, his face red and tight, veins bulging near his temples. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he barked. I closed the door behind him. "Exactly what I warned you I'd do if you kept crossing lines. You froze 6 accounts?" "6. I've got payroll this week, vendors calling, and my accountant is talking like the IRS is about to parachute through my office windows." He wasn't wrong, they were. I kept my voice calm. "Then maybe you shouldn't have created a shell company and funneled money out of a shared account using a forged signature." He didn't answer. His eyes darted across the room like he was looking for something, some loophole to crawl through, some old lever to pull. "You always were ungrateful," he muttered. "Everything I did for this family. For you." I laughed, once sharp and humorless. "You did it for control. You wanted a dynasty you could rule, and when I wouldn't play prince to your paper kingdom, you threw me out." His jaw worked furiously. "I built that company." "No," I said. "We built it. I bled for it, and you tried to bury me under it." He stepped forward. "You're tearing this family apart." I stepped back. "No, you did that the second you decided a betrayal was easier than a conversation." For a moment, he just stared at me. Then slowly he turned and walked toward the door. But before leaving, he looked over his shoulder, his voice bitter. "Don't expect any forgiveness when you're the one left with nothing." He slammed the door hard enough to rattle the picture frames. I stood there breathing heavily, the silence afterwards louder than his shouting. Emily called the next day. She sounded hollow, tired. "He's saying you're trying to bankrupt him." I didn't respond. "I know," she continued, "that I messed up. I didn't know about the forgery, David, I swear." I believed her, but I didn't say that. "I want to fix this," she whispered. "I know you do," I said. "But not everything can be fixed." She sniffled. "Mom keeps saying she's caught between her husband and her son." "That's not new," I replied, more coldly than I intended. She just finally had to admit it out loud. Emily didn't argue. "I just want us to be a family again." I stayed quiet, because I didn't know if I wanted that anymore. The audit came fast and brutal. The forensic team uncovered more than $750,000 in misused funds, dozens of violations, and even payments made to contractors who didn't exist. My father had built an illusion of success on borrowed time and bad debt. The consequences came just as fast. The court ordered liquidation of the remaining assets. The house went first, the cars, the office building. What hadn't been seized was auctioned off. My parents moved into a 2-bedroom rental apartment 30 minutes outside the city. Emily stayed with them for a while, helping them adjust. I didn't visit. I couldn't. At night, I sat at my desk staring out the window, wondering if I'd gone too far. There was no pride in what I'd done, just necessity. I didn't feel like a victor. I felt like someone who'd survived an explosion they had to set themselves. Still, something inside me had shifted. Peacefully, quietly. The guilt that used to gnaw at me when I disobeyed, the fear of disappointing them, it was gone. Or maybe it had just finally burned away in the wreckage. I poured my energy into rebuilding what mattered. Not the family name, not the broken legacy they left behind, but my own projects, my clean slate ventures. I reached out to a few former partners, quietly forming a new LLC. I brought in people I trusted, people with ethics, not just blood ties. No more nepotism. No more emotional manipulation disguised as duty. I also made time for someone I'd neglected in the chaos, Maya, my partner of 3 years. She'd kept her distance during the storm, not because she didn't care, but because she understood that sometimes you have to let someone walk through fire alone. When I came back to her quieter, steadier, she didn't say "I told you so." She just poured me a cup of coffee and said, "Now you get to build your version of family." That meant something. That meant everything. Months passed. I heard less and less from my parents. Occasionally Emily would text, just photos of her new job, her cat, or updates about her therapy sessions. She never mentioned Dad. I never asked. One day a letter arrived. Thick paper. No return address. I opened it slowly, carefully, expecting legal jargon or veiled guilt, but it was short. Just a few lines written in my father's familiar slanted handwriting. "I won't ask for forgiveness. I won't say I didn't fail you. But I'm glad you didn't become like me." There was no name at the bottom. No apology. But for the first time in my life, he didn't pretend to be right. And somehow that was enough. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer, not to revisit, not to frame, but just to remind myself of one thing. Sometimes breaking away is the only way to rebuild something honest. 6 months later, I stood at the edge of a quiet coastal bluff just outside Monterey, watching the waves roll against the rocks below. The wind was sharp but cleansing, like a reset button I didn't know I'd needed. Maya stood beside me, her hand in mine, both of us quiet in the kind of stillness you only get when nothing needs to be said. We had just closed on a small sunlit home tucked between a forest preserve and the ocean. Not big, not flashy, but honest. Ours. The business I rebuilt after severing ties with my father had started to thrive. I'd launched a consulting firm for small family businesses. Ironic, I know, but the irony wasn't lost on me. I'd learned exactly what not to do, and there were entrepreneurs out there who needed someone who understood what dysfunction looked like from the inside. And as strange as it was to say that pain had value now, clients respected my no-nonsense approach, and within 4 months, I had to hire 2 employees to manage demand. It wasn't the empire I once dreamed of. It was better. It was healthy. For the first time in a long time, I woke up not bracing for impact. I just woke up. I saw Emily sometimes. She still visited my parents, helped them with bills, took them groceries. She never asked me to come along anymore, and I think she finally accepted that my absence wasn't a punishment, it was protection. I still believe they're sorry, she told me one evening over wine, but I don't expect you to carry any of that. I nodded. I hope they are, but their healing doesn't require my return. She smiled a little sadly. I used to think forgiveness was about going back, but maybe it's just about letting go. We clinked glasses and didn't talk about it again. I kept the letter my father wrote, the one where he admitted his failure, in a drawer I never opened. Not out of spite, just because I didn't need it. Maya asked me once if I would ever write him back. I said maybe, but I haven't. Because healing didn't mean revisiting the wreckage. It meant planting something new on clean soil. On a brisk October afternoon, we threw a small backyard wedding, just a few friends, colleagues, and Maya's family. No drama, no pageantry, just music, laughter, and long tables lined with local food, string lights, and mismatched chairs. We danced barefoot on the grass until the sky turned indigo. I didn't invite my parents. I didn't wait for them to ask why. But Emily came. She stood up during the toast, her voice trembling, and said, "David has always been the strongest person I know. He taught me that family isn't about obligation, it's about who shows up when it matters. And Maya, thank you for being that person." We hugged. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was losing a sister. I felt like we had finally become real siblings. Some nights I still think about everything that happened, the voicemail, the lawsuit, the fallout. I don't replay it with anger anymore, just awareness. Those months taught me something I wish I'd learned earlier. Your peace is worth more than anyone's approval. I used to think I had to earn my father's respect to prove my worth. But I know now that self-respect isn't granted, it's claimed. You can build loyalty on guilt. You can build love on fear, but you cannot build peace without boundaries. There's one moment I always come back to now. It's simple. A Tuesday morning. I'm standing in my kitchen pouring coffee. Maya's reading on the couch, barefoot in her sweatshirt, a half-eaten muffin on a plate beside her. My phone buzzes with a client update, but I don't reach for it. I just watch the steam curl out of my mug, the sun spilling through the window. And I think this is it. Not revenge, not justice, not even closure. Just freedom. Sometimes I wonder if my father still checks the old business website, hoping to see his name somewhere still tied to something that mattered. He won't find it. I rebuilt from scratch, and the new version has no trace of him. That's not bitterness, that's a boundary. I never burned bridges. I just stopped crossing them. Let them grow old and unused. Let the people on the other side decide when to build something better. But I'm not standing still anymore. I'm walking forward, and for the first time in a long time, I know exactly where I'm going. Story 2. I'm Alex. I'm 31, work in logistics, and I've been saving up for 2 years to give my parents a proper vacation, something they'd never splurge on themselves. A 1-week trip to Europe, everything pre-arranged, business class flights, 5-star hotels, curated food tours, museum passes, and private transportation. I paid for all of it, planned every detail down to the restaurant menus. I was proud of it, excited even. My parents have done a lot for me growing up, and this was supposed to be a small way to say thank you. Until the morning of the trip. I showed up at their place around 6:00 a.m. to take them to the airport. My mom was already waiting by the door with her suitcase, but when I got out of the car to help her load it, my sister Casey walked out with her own suitcase. Confused, I looked at her, then back at my mom. "What's going on?" Mom smiled like it was no big deal. We thought Casey should go instead of you. She's been really stressed lately and needs a break. I stood there frozen. Instead of me, I said slowly, yes, she said as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. Sweetheart, you're always working. You can take another trip. Casey really needs this right now. Casey didn't even try to look embarrassed. She just smirked and shrugged. Thanks, bro. You're the best. My dad came out then, head down, suitcase in hand, and placed it beside the car. He didn't even make eye contact. I stood in that driveway trying to decide whether to scream or walk away. Instead, I nodded, muttered, let's get going, and opened the trunk. They loaded their bags. Casey climbed into the back seat like this was always part of the plan. The entire drive to the airport was awkward, mostly filled with her rambling about Paris shopping and Instagram content. My hands gripped the wheel tighter with every mile. At one point, my dad said, thanks for the ride, Alex. I know this is unusual. I stared at the road. Unusual. Yeah, that's one word for it. Casey leaned forward and asked, you're not mad, right? This is so generous of you. I gave a tight fake smile. Yeah, enjoy the trip. When we got to the airport, I helped unload the bags. Mom hugged me. Thank you for understanding. This means a lot to us, and to Casey. I didn't respond, just nodded. Casey beamed like she'd won a prize. Later, Alex. They walked into the terminal. I got back in the car, pulled into traffic, and drove home in silence. It took me 10 minutes after walking in the door to decide what I was going to do. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and logged into every booking site I'd used. I canceled the hotel reservations, reached out to the tour company, and requested full refunds. Airline seat upgrades. Gone. I kept the return flights because I wasn't spiteful. I just wasn't going to pay for luxury if I wasn't going to be part of it. By the time I was done, I had confirmation emails lined up in my inbox, and I felt strangely calm. They wanted to go without me. Fine, but they could figure out how to enjoy Europe on someone else's dime. The call started the moment they landed. Apparently, they were told at check-in that the hotel reservation was gone. Then the tour guide said they had no record of their names. I ignored the first few calls. When I finally picked up, my mom's voice was sharp. What did you do? Alex? Why are the reservations canceled? I kept my voice even. I canceled them. There was a pause. Why would you do that? Because you took my trip and gave it to Casey, I replied. You're lucky I even drove you to the airport. We thought you'd understand. I laughed. Understand what? That I spent 2 years saving for something you gave to someone else because she needed a break, that my effort meant so little to you. She didn't respond. I hung up. Casey left a voicemail after that, calling me childish and selfish. I didn't listen to the whole thing. I just deleted it. I turned off my phone. That was the first night in a long time I slept soundly. By the time I turned my phone back on the next morning, I had 14 missed calls. 9 from my mom, 3 from Casey, 2 from my dad, which honestly surprised me. He's always been the quiet one, let things slide, didn't get involved unless someone was bleeding or the house was on fire. Guess this qualified. The texts were about what you'd expect. Alex, please call me back. The front desk says we don't have a booking. This is embarrassing. Please fix this before the rest of the trip is ruined. Casey is upset. She's crying in the room. That one made me pause for a second. In the room, I thought. So they found somewhere to stay. I scrolled further. You went too far, Alex. This is family. Right, family. The same family that replaced me on the trip I spent 2 years planning. I didn't respond. I didn't even feel tempted to. Instead, I got up, made some coffee, and spent the morning deep cleaning the apartment. Something about scrubbing the stove felt oddly therapeutic. I vacuumed the corners I usually ignore and reorganized the cabinet where I keep the coffee beans. By mid-afternoon, I'd nearly forgotten about the messages. Until the phone rang again. This time it was Casey. I let it go to voicemail. She left one, of course. This is ridiculous, Alex. You're being so immature. I don't get why you're making this such a big deal. Just call the hotel and fix it. She said it like she hadn't done anything wrong. Like I was the unreasonable one for not letting her enjoy a free trip she had no hand in paying for or planning. I deleted the voicemail and turned off my phone again. Over the next couple of days, the silence was peaceful. I cooked meals I liked, took long walks around the neighborhood, read a book I'd been meaning to finish. I even went back to the gym for the first time in weeks. But the quiet didn't last. 3 days in, I turned my phone back on and found a new batch of voicemails waiting. This time they sounded different. The tone had shifted. Mom wasn't angry anymore. She was exhausted. Alex, we're heading back to the airport early. The trip is basically ruined. Please, can we talk when we get home? From Casey. I don't know what your problem is, but thanks for screwing everything up. You've really outdone yourself this time. From Dad. I don't understand what's happening. Call me. We need to talk. That last one lingered. Not because of the words, but because of what wasn't said. He never asked questions unless he already knew the answer and didn't like it. They got back on Sunday. I didn't go to meet them. I figured they could Uber from the airport like regular people. After all, Casey was really stressed, right? Surely she could handle booking a ride. Later that day, I got the call. This time I answered. Alex, my mom started. I'm going to say this once. What you did, that was petty. You embarrassed us. You humiliated your sister. I took a breath. Calm, steady. You embarrassed yourselves. I just took back what was mine. You canceled everything without warning. You swapped me out without asking. I figured we were all just making decisions without consulting each other now. There was a pause. Then quieter. We thought you'd be okay with it. That sentence hit me like a wave. We thought you'd be okay with it. Because I always was. I always rolled over, let them take what they wanted, let Casey call the shots. I think for the first time, my mom realized I wasn't playing that role anymore. I'm not okay with it, I said finally, and you need to understand that. She sighed, defeated. Your sister, she's still really upset. I didn't respond. Are you really cutting us off over one trip? I paused. This wasn't about the trip. It was about years of this kind of thing. Years of being second to her. Of always being expected to understand, to adjust, to sacrifice. And you never said anything. Because I thought maybe one day it would matter. That I would matter. She was silent again. I'm done being the fallback option, I said. You made your choice. Now live with it. I hung up. The next day, my dad called. I let it go to voicemail. I didn't want to hear more excuses, but part of me still listened. Alex, I wish it hadn't gone this way. I don't agree with what your mother and Casey did, but this doesn't feel right. We're family. That word again. Family. It's funny how quickly it gets pulled out when people need something from you. But when it's time to actually act like family, the definition gets real flexible. I didn't call him back. Instead, I went to my laptop, reopened the folder labeled Europe Trip, and deleted it. All of it. The spreadsheets, the itinerary, the restaurant reviews I'd bookmarked, gone. I closed the laptop and looked around the apartment. It was quiet. No phone buzzing, no guilt, no expectations. Just me. And honestly, it felt good. The voicemail from my dad stayed on my phone for 3 more days before I deleted it. I didn't listen to it again. I didn't need to. I knew what he'd say or try to say, some version of, let's just move on, without ever really going back and fixing the thing we needed to fix. It was always that way. Gloss it over, sweep it under the rug, wait for the dust to settle. But I wasn't interested in playing along anymore. The week after they got back, I didn't hear much. Not a text, not a call. I figured they were giving me the silent treatment, or maybe they thought I'd come crawling back apologizing for overreacting. I didn't. Instead, I started focusing on something else. Something better. Me. I finally booked that solo trip to Lisbon I'd been eyeing for months, different from the original Europe plan, but that didn't matter. What mattered was, it was mine. Fully. No compromise, no tag-alongs, no last-minute replacements. I also signed up for a cooking class downtown. Italian dishes on Tuesdays. There was something quiet and healing about kneading dough, rolling out pasta with strangers who didn't know anything about me, just flour, water, and the chance to create something that tasted like comfort. Every little step I took away from them felt like stepping toward myself. 2 weeks after the call with my mom, I got a message from Casey. Just a single line. Can we talk? I stared at it for a long while. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I already knew what I wouldn't say. I wouldn't say it's okay. I wouldn't say I understand. And I definitely wouldn't say, let's just forget it happened. But I said yes. Not because I owed her anything, but because I needed to close the door properly, no drafts left behind. We met at a small cafe halfway between our places. Neutral ground. When I walked in, she was already there, sunglasses on, fiddling with a half-drunk iced latte. She stood when she saw me, awkward smile, no hug. Hey, she said. Hey. We sat. I didn't expect you to say yes, she admitted. I shrugged. I didn't expect you to ask. There was a pause. Then she leaned in, voice low. Look, I didn't think it'd blow up like that. I said nothing. I didn't mean to steal the trip. I raised an eyebrow. Didn't you? You knew I planned that for Mom and Dad. You knew I saved for years. She didn't answer right away. Finally, she sighed. I've had a rough year. I thought I needed a win. And you thought that win should come at my expense. She flinched. That was the first honest moment between us in a long time. I'm sorry, Alex, I shouldn't have gone. I should have told them no. I nodded. You should have. The silence sat thick between us. Then I said, do you know why I canceled everything? She looked up surprised I was even willing to talk about it. Because I needed you to feel what it was like to be left out, to have something taken from you like it didn't matter. She swallowed hard. Yeah, I felt it. I finished my drink, then stood. I don't hate you, Casey, I said quietly, but I don't trust you either. And that's not something I can fake anymore. She didn't try to stop me when I left. Lisbon was bright, warm sun, cobbled hills, tiled walls. I walked for hours every day, got lost on purpose, ate too much seafood, learned to order coffee in Portuguese, and stood at the edge of the river watching boats drift past like they had nowhere else to be. I journaled a lot. About the trip, the silence, the things I used to swallow that I'd finally spit out. One night in a little rooftop bar, I wrote the line that stuck with me ever since. I don't owe anyone my silence anymore. Because that's what it was all those years, me biting my tongue, making myself smaller so no one else had to feel uncomfortable. Letting things slide. Letting myself slide. No more. When I got home, I found an envelope in my mailbox. No return address. Inside was a short note handwritten. My mom's script. Alex. We're sorry, we miss you. We want to do better. Love, Mom and Dad. No explanations, no long apologies, just a few simple words. It wasn't enough to fix everything, but it was more than I expected. I didn't call, not yet. Instead, I set the note on my fridge right next to the Polaroid I took in Lisbon, me smiling on a cliff above the ocean, wind in my hair, the sun behind me. A reminder of who I was becoming. Months have passed now. Casey and I talk occasionally. Not close, not bitter, just neutral. That's all I have space for. My parents, they've eased up. No pressure, just the occasional message. And slowly I've started letting them back in little by little. I needed them to see who I was without their version of me smothering the real one. And now maybe they finally do. But here's the thing. Even if they never truly change, I have. And I'm not going back. I plan my trips for me now. I speak up. I walk away when I need to. The person who drove them to the airport quietly and swallowed the hurt. She's gone. The one who stood up, pulled the plug, and walked away with her head high. She's here to stay. And she doesn't owe anyone an apology for that. Story 3. I never thought I'd get pulled into a full-blown family mess over an apartment, but here we are. My name's Rachel, 30, single, and recently promoted to a management position at a marketing firm. It came with a great raise, a better title, and an awful commute. 2 hours each way, 5 days a week, and I was burning out fast. During one of our usual Saturday dinners at my parents' place, I mentioned that I was looking for a place closer to the office. My mom, always the practical one when it came to property, perked up. You remember your grandma's old apartment, the one we inherited after she passed? It's just a 10-minute walk from your office. The tenants moved out last week. I did remember it. I spent most of my childhood weekends there. 2 bedrooms, quiet neighborhood, a tiny balcony where Grandma used to keep potted lavender. If you want it, she continued, you can have it for a family rate, half the local average. I was floored. I accepted right then, feeling like I just caught a golden opportunity. No need for apartment hunting, no sketchy landlords, and I'd be walking to work. The apartment, though, was a mess. Old wallpaper, peeling carpets that smelled like someone had spilled milk and never cleaned it up. Outdated appliances and furniture that looked like it had survived 3 generations. Still, I was grateful. I called my mom that same night and asked if I could renovate. Of course, she said breezily. Just don't paint the walls bright green or something weird. I spent the next 6 months transforming the place, stripping wallpaper, repainting every wall in calm, warm tones. I bought furniture that made sense for the space, a beautiful gray couch, a sturdy oak dining table, bookshelves, and a plush rug that tied the living room together. Every penny spent was mine, every piece chosen by me. When my mom came by to see the final result, she actually hugged me, a real hug. Rachel, this looks incredible, she said. I don't think I'd ever heard her sound so impressed. It felt like things were finally going my way. A few weeks later, during another family dinner, I shared some good news. I'd just been promoted again. My mom barely looked up. That's nice, honey. Did you hear what your brother Ethan's doing? Ah, yes. Ethan, my older brother, the self-declared entrepreneur. He'd started and failed at 3 businesses already. His current one, a courier startup that was supposedly booming. Turns out it wasn't. A big competitor moved into town and Ethan's clients jumped ship. My parents naturally decided to help him out. They took out a loan to keep his business afloat. I suggested maybe it was time Ethan considered other options. They weren't happy with me. "You just don't understand business," my dad said. "Ethan's a risk taker. You play it safe." I swallowed my pride and stayed quiet. I was used to it by now. Ethan had always been the golden child. I was the reliable one. Months passed. Ethan's business tanked anyway. He and his wife Jenna moved back in with our parents temporarily. Then came the day everything changed. I came home one evening to find my mom, Ethan, and Jenna standing in my apartment. Without warning, Jenna was looking around like she was buying the place. "What's going on?" I asked. "We're moving Ethan and Jenna in," Mom said casually. "You'll need to leave by next week." I thought she was joking. I laughed. "We've increased the rent," she added. 3 times what you were paying. Since you can't afford that, it's best you start looking elsewhere." I froze. The apartment I had spent months and thousands of dollars renovating was being handed over to Ethan and Jenna. My mom stood there unapologetic. Ethan didn't even look me in the eye. I left that evening and didn't cry. I packed. I found a new place the next day, signed the lease, and hired movers within 24 hours. Before leaving, I took everything that was mine. Every chair, every curtain rod, every piece of furniture. The apartment was bare when I locked the door and slid the keys under my parents' front door. The next morning, the calls started. My mom, Ethan, Jenna. "Where's all the furniture? Heck, you had no right to gut the apartment. You ruined everything." I didn't respond. I made coffee in my new kitchen. I breathed. I let it all go. But I knew this wasn't over. Not yet. I didn't grow up expecting much from my family. I learned early on that loyalty in our house was conditional. My parents had their favorites, and that favorite was always my older brother Brandon. He was charming, bold, and good at making people believe in his ideas. I was the dependable one, quiet, structured, and practical. I never resented him for it, not outwardly. I figured everyone has a role in the family, and I knew mine. Still, I thought the apartment would be different. I wasn't looking for praise, just a little fairness. After months of backbreaking effort, after spending nearly every evening and weekend rebuilding that space, I finally made it feel like home. I wasn't just renting anymore. I had created something. Every brushstroke, every shelf I mounted, every screw I tightened was a promise I made to myself that I could build a life on my own terms. But that all came undone in the span of 5 minutes. It started like any other evening. I'd stayed late at work finalizing a client report, and I was just looking forward to heating up leftovers and maybe watching something mindless on Netflix. But when I reached my floor, I could hear voices, familiar ones, inside my apartment. I unlocked the door, stepped in, and found my mom, Brandon, and his wife, Shannon, standing in my living room. Shannon was holding a tape measure, casually sizing up the space like she was about to redecorate. What are you doing here?" I asked, forcing my voice to stay calm. My mother turned around, completely unbothered. "Oh, Ellie, don't be so dramatic. This is still my apartment. You know that." I blinked. "You could have at least called." She waved me off. "There was no need. We were just checking in. The place looks lovely. You've done a good job." It was like I wasn't even standing there. Shannon was already taking mental inventory of my things, her eyes darting across the couch, the shelves, the art I'd framed. Brandon didn't say much. He just stood there with his hands in his pockets, nodding like he'd already made up his mind. Then my mom said it. "We've decided Brandon and Shannon are going to move in next week." I didn't speak. I couldn't. I stared at her like she'd suddenly switched languages. "What do you mean, move in? I live here." "Well, that's the thing," she said, smiling like she was sharing a secret. "The market value of the place has gone up, and with all the upgrades, it really should be bringing in more rent. So unless you can afford the new rate, which is triple what you're paying now, we're going to offer it to someone who can." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was the only sound my body could produce. "Triple the rent? Are you serious?" "I'm being generous," she replied. "You can have a week to think about it. After that, I expect the keys." Brandon looked away. Shannon smiled. I didn't cry, I didn't yell, I didn't beg. I walked to my bedroom, closed the door, and sat on the edge of my bed. My mind was racing, but strangely I wasn't shocked. Deep down, I think I'd always known this could happen. I just hoped I was wrong. An hour later, I texted a realtor. By noon the next day, I'd found a listing 2 blocks from my office. It was more expensive, smaller, and didn't have the same charm, but it was mine, and no one could take it from me. I called in a personal day, booked a same-day moving service, and spent the afternoon placing post-it notes on everything I'd bought with my own money. Furniture, electronics, decor, cookware. If I paid for it, it came with me. I left only the essentials that had come with the unit. The apartment looked hollow by the time the movers finished, like a stage after the final curtain call. That evening, I left my keys in an envelope, slid it under my parents' front door, and walked away. No text, no explanation, just silence. The next morning, the storm hit. Calls, messages, voicemails. First my mom, then Brandon, then Shannon, one after another. Ellie, what did you do? There's nothing in the apartment. You had no right to take everything. Your brother needs that space. You're being cruel, Ellie. This isn't how family treats family. I sat on my new couch in my new apartment, sipping coffee and watching the sun rise through a window they'd never touch. I didn't respond. I didn't feel the need to. Every angry word they threw at me only confirmed what I already knew: they never saw me as an equal. Just a backup, a safety net. The last message I read was from Shannon. You're just jealous because Brandon took the spotlight and you can't stand it. That one made me laugh, not because it wasn't offensive, but because it showed me exactly who they thought I was and how wrong they were. I blocked them all, every number, every social media account. Just like that, I cut the cord, and for the first time in years, I could breathe. After I blocked their numbers, the days grew quiet. At first, the silence felt heavy, like standing in an empty room after a fight, but soon it turned into something else, something softer, a kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. For a while, I didn't tell anyone in the family what had happened. I just lived. I unpacked each box slowly on my time. I arranged the furniture just the way I liked it. No compromise, no one's opinions creeping in. My new place wasn't perfect, but it was mine in every way. I painted the walls sage green. I put up framed prints I'd been saving. I bought a new bookshelf and filled it with stories that had helped me through old storms. I stopped checking my phone for messages that never made me feel good anyway. I wasn't angry, not really. I was done being angry. Anger had burned bright for a while, but like any fire, it needed fuel. I'd run out. Now I just wanted to live on my own terms. Then 1 month after I moved, the silence cracked open. My phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. For some reason, I picked up. It was my mom. She didn't say hello, didn't ask how I was doing. She went straight to the point. Ellie, why didn't the rent come through this month? I stared at the wall like it could explain this to me. Because I don't live there anymore. There was a long pause on her end. Then, as if she hadn't heard me at all, she said, well, Brandon and Shannon are staying there now, but we're still expecting you to keep paying until the lease term ends. I almost laughed, but it wasn't funny. Let me get this straight, I said slowly. You raised the rent to 3 times what I was paying, kicked me out so Brandon and Shannon could move in, and now you want me to pay for them. Don't be selfish, she snapped. We're your family. Brandon's business is still struggling. We've got the loan payments. You're doing well. You can afford to help. There it was. That familiar rhythm. Her voice didn't ask, it demanded, the same way it always had. And I realized something in that moment. She didn't see me, not really. To her, I was useful, the responsible one, the helper, the wallet, not a daughter, not someone who also needed support, understanding, or fairness, just the background player in the Brandon show. You're asking me to keep paying for a home you forced me out of, I said. My voice didn't shake. I'm not doing that. I owe you nothing. Her voice turned cold. I'm disappointed in you, Ellie. And for the first time, I didn't flinch. I was just thinking the same thing I said. Then I hung up. And this time, I didn't feel guilty. I didn't even block her again. I just let her be. Let all of them be. If they wanted to talk, they could talk to the silence. Weeks passed, then months. No more calls, no more texts, just updates trickling in from my cousin Mia, who still checked in now and then. Brandon had another business idea. Something about handcrafted pet collars. My parents tried to help him pitch it to a few friends of theirs. No one was interested. Then they asked around for loans again, but word had spread. People were cautious. Eventually, they stopped asking. Mia told me they'd started cutting back, sold their second car, canceled their cable, talked about renting out the old house to cover debt. I listened, I nodded, but I didn't offer help, not anymore. Instead, I focused on my life. I started a yoga class on Saturday mornings, joined a local book club, took weekend hikes with a coworker who eventually became more than a coworker. His name was Drew. He had this way of listening that made you feel like your words mattered, even the small ones. One night after dinner, he asked about my family. I told him the story straight. No sugarcoating, no dramatics, just what happened. He didn't interrupt, didn't try to fix it, just nodded and said, "You did the right thing." And that somehow meant more than I expected. Around the 6-month mark, I found myself walking by the old building where Grandma Helen's apartment had been. Just on a whim, I stopped across the street, looked up at the windows I'd once painted around, where I'd watched sunsets and imagined a future. I didn't feel sadness or nostalgia, just distance, like remembering a chapter in a book you've long since finished. They took that place from me, but they never got to keep what mattered: the effort, the lessons, the growth. The way I learned to stand on my own feet and finally stop asking to be chosen. I was done waiting for their approval, done shrinking to fit into the space they gave me. I wasn't meant to be a footnote in someone else's story. I had my own to write, and I was writing it now. The next day, I bought a small wind chime and hung it on the balcony of my new apartment. It caught the breeze just right, soft and steady, like the beat of something strong rebuilding itself. Sometimes when I sit out there in the evening with tea in my hand and music low in the background, I hear it ring, and it reminds me I'm home now. Not because of where I live, but because of who I've become.